Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Woodland Pools. And we are here at the Cardano Summit 2023, sitting down with the Maestro team. So thank you guys so much for joining and sitting down with me. Great to meet you guys in person.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. And so maybe why don't we go from the very beginning here, take a step back and introduce yourselves and about the project and sort of what you guys are up to. And yeah, we'll go from there. And then we'll talk about your congratulations on the win last night. We'll get to all of that. So who are you guys, and tell us a little about Maestro.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Marvin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Maestro. Mm-hmm. I have a background in machine learning and AI, many years working in biotech, and then I've been now in Web3 for 2 years. I've been involved in Genius Field, and now I've founded Maestro as an infrastructure provider, dApp development platform for the Cardano blockchain.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Maestro, and pretty much covered it. I also come from a heavy engineering background, worked in tech companies in Silicon Valley, and then just saw an opportunity to really change the game with blockchain infrastructure in Cardano. So we're here building out Maestro.
Awesome. And so that's great. So on the channel, we talk a lot about infrastructure projects and stuff like that, because one of my favorite things I always say is if everybody always talks about getting mass adoption and people coming in, right? But you can't have mass adoption of consumers coming in if you don't first have mass adoption of projects building things that consumers actually want, right? So maybe give us a little bit of background. So for those who know anything about Maestro, what is Maestro and what kind of infrastructure are you guys doing? And sort of what is your goal for then, for the stuff that you're building and how that brings people in?
Yeah, sure. So in general terms, we're trying to streamline the process of building dApps, okay, right? And building a dApp is not just a smart contract and you're gone, right? Yep. There's an entire stack to get to a live application. Yep. And so our tagline is we want to build the complete stack for Web3, yeah, right? So we're providing access to manageable, building blocks for that building. More concretely, that means we have our own blockchain indexer, so we provide on-chain data through our APIs. Yep. But then we have a whole suite of services like transaction management. So once you submit your transactions, get notified or able to monitor the state of that transactions. And we're expanding into market price APIs to track the prices of all the tokens. So we index the smart contract data of DEXs. Sure. And today we announced actually the release of our plug-and-play smart contracts. We can go more details later, sure, but allows us to really deploy smart contract in an instant and really completely streamline and abstract away the complexity about launching a smart contract into your application.
Well, maybe that's a good spot. Let's just go from there then. So that's interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that smart contract, the plug-and-play smart contract facility. So how does that work, and what does that provide?
Yeah. So essentially, we're launching actually the first smart contract marketplace on Cardano.
Oh, okay.
And it is a marketplace of open source contracts.
Yep.
And the reason is because we see a big issue right now on Cardano is a lot of contracts are closed source.
Yep.
A lot of teams are building these contracts, spending a lot of money, but then because they're closed source, it makes it really hard for the next generation of projects to come in.
Right.
And I've talked to actually auditing firms like Anesthesia Labs, and they told me they've audited the same contract maybe 10 times.
Yeah, sure.
Because people are just reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. And this is just not scalable, right? You see in other ecosystems like EVM, there is readily available, standardized, well-audited contracts that people can build on top of and then innovate from there, right? Yeah. All technology is built on shoulders of giants, right? It's built on other people's work. So we're hoping with this marketplace to incentivize people to open source their contracts. And to do that, we've introduced what we call contract royalties.
Nice.
So in the same way that you have NFT royalties, we want to be if you're a developer and you have these contracts, you want to maybe have a way to incentivize yourself to open source it. Yeah. And so now, whenever people will use your contract, the original author will be rewarded continuously. Yeah. And so the way we integrate that into our platform is that now we offered fully managed APIs and fully managed UI widgets that integrates with these contracts. Yeah. So if you're tech savvy, you can use the smart contract as is, as an open source code, or if you want a more managed solution, you can use the Maestro APIs and get access to all these contracts instantly. And on top of that, we allow people to build front-end, UI widgets that a bit like Squarespace or Stripe, you can just plug in that UI component, and now you have NFT staking on your application without any code, and it's all fully end-to-end integrated into Maestro. And the cool thing is that the original author of that contract will get paid every time a transaction is built.
I love that. Because the thing is, so at Book.io, for example, when we did our token offering that just wrapped up, we had to do some more like custom stuff to let people swap from like their old book tokens to the new book tokens. But basically once that swap happened, or for anybody that was coming and buying the original token, then from there we just did that those who bought it, then it got sent to like a lock contract and it was unlocked at like a certain date. And that's just like one of the most standard contracts you could possibly do, right? Like put something into like a vesting schedule, have it unlock at a certain time. And when we went through that process, we had to like, I actually wrote those in Aiken, right?
Yeah.
And so went through the whole process, writing it in Aiken, then had to get it audited and spend all that money to get it audited and do whatever else for what is really one of the most basic, not basic, but maybe one of the most common things that you can do.
Standard. It should be a standard.
Yeah, it should be a standard thing that's like basically, like we were talking about this with RJ, our CTO, about like, it's got to get to the point where even some of the more advanced things that we've been hearing about like using compositional things and like having like a validator just to manage like a signatures list of like who needs to sign and stuff like that, and being able to update that list of signatures and whatever else. It's like that thing is like a utility.
Yes.
Like, you shouldn't have to be rewriting that every single time. Like, we need to get to the point where, like I've been saying this for a while, we need to get to a point where that these very basic utility type on-chain validators need to get kind of like what like NPM is for like JavaScript or something like that, where you kind of just like, hey, like Lodash or like something where you're kind of like, look, I just need like this very simple thing that just does this very common utility and you can plug and play them together. So that's so cool that you guys are doing that, because it's the kind of thing that we've been talking about and sort of thinking about for a long time. But it's
funny that you mentioned vesting. Like that's actually, we launched with the linear vesting contract,
right, sure.
with the APIs, right? So like the contract is available and the writer and auditor of that contract gets their royalties.
Love
and
it.
We already partnered with them to build the off-chain infra and have APIs for that. So you could have actually used our linear vesting APIs.
Right. And
for next time.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely, but that's what's so great about it, is that these are the kind of things, and this is why I love infrastructure projects in general. We talk about them in the channel so much. These are the kind of things you think about it, like, this stuff just needs to happen, you know what I mean? And so, like, right now, like, as we're talking about this, I'm literally learning about this right now as we're chatting. Like, I didn't even know you guys were doing that stuff, and it's like, that's so great. So, okay, cool. So that's like a whole category where you basically got open source smart contracts as a service that people can plug into. And then the nice thing is you offer it at two levels, it sounds like. One where you can plug the smart contract in more directly if you want to do more of like the coding work to it. Then you have that UI layer for those that want to just like do a very simple application. Because I imagine it's probably, you basically have like parameterized contracts, right? You just enter your parameters of do it for this amount of time or for these tokens or these addresses, and it kind of just works from there.
Exactly. And then we generate this little UI component. It's a bit like a white label dApp, right?
Yep.
And so then you can integrate that as a plugin. And the cool thing is that that's also open source. So front-end engineers can contribute their own front-end widgets to the marketplace, and then they can add their own front-end fee.
Right.
And so now we also create an incentive for front-end engineers to say, hey, I don't know how to write smart contracts, but I'm really good at building great user experience.
Right.
I'm going to build a front-end for this contract, and I'm going to charge a little fee for it.
That's great.
And then now it's available for everyone.
And so now with that, right, so a lot of times I think people don't properly appreciate that. When you say like smart contract, that's a very overloaded term that it takes into account a lot of different things, right? Because there is of course the on-chain validator, but then there is the very like algorithmic UTXO selection and everything to create the transaction to send it to that validator. And then there's the UI layer of how you interact with that to get to that point. So we've discussed the on-chain validator and the UI part. Do you also have like an open source mechanism for then like the actual off-chain construction? Because that's where it can get really, really tricky, right? In terms of like, wallets that have UTXOs that are like too big, that are hard to move around and stuff like that. Like, do you also have then open source mechanisms for the off-chain construction part?
Maybe you can talk about the backend server,
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, the opportunity as a provider was that we provide APIs, and under the hood, we're just constructing the transaction.
Oh, sure. Okay. So it's an API endpoint.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
The front end hits. Perfect.
Yeah. So there's multiple paths of the open source. There's a smart contract, and then there's the widgets.
Yeah.
And then there's one maybe less important, but is the example server. So people can run servers that are already integrated with the Maestro API, and then the widget just interacts with that server. If you've ever integrated with Stripe, for example, they have that exact thing. They have like front-end clients, that are open source. They have backend example servers that are integrated with their payment processing railways.
Yeah.
But obviously, like their service providers and their value proposition is the payment railways. So they're not going to open source the payment railways. Right. So, but everything around it is open source. And so people could contribute contracts, and they are listed in the marketplace.
Sure.
But they don't have to have widgets. They might just want to have the contracts there, right? So these things could happen in parallel. But where we bring the value as a provider is the APIs that interact with the off-chain transaction construction.
Got it. Yeah, awesome. So with that, I think we kind of took an immediate detour into what you're saying is one of your more like newer things that you're offering with the smart contracts thing, because I just think that's so cool. But so tell me a little bit more about maybe some of the more traditional products that you've had out for a minute here, and sort of where you're trying to build some market share into some of the other things that you've been working on.
Yes, I would say our core product is our blockchain indexer.
Okay.
Right. So that's the people call it like a Cardano API.
Okay.
Right. So we index the entire blockchain,
Sure.
and we give easy access to on-chain data.
Yep.
And that's basically what BlockForce is doing.
Right.
And we're trying to disrupt the space on really focusing on better performance, better scalability, but also more developer-friendly APIs.
Okay.
So our APIs are actually designed in such a way that what would take 3 to 4 different API calls on BlockForce could be just one.
Okay.
And it could be even more extreme than that. Like sometimes it's 100 to 1, right? For example, like in a wallet, you may have hundreds of addresses.
Yep.
On BlockForce, you have to look up the UTXO at every single address.
Okay.
For us, you can pass in the 100 addresses in one call and get all the UTXOs.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So then, in terms of network speed, right, you get all those UTXOs of that wallet state much faster, and it's also cheaper, you pay for less APIs. So we're trying to really, we spend a lot of time working very close with the developers and understanding what do they really need to build applications.
Right.
So we've become very familiar actually with kind of the common bottlenecks and the common use cases of what type of on-chain data do they want and in what format do they want, right? Do they just want the asset ID, or they want the asset ID plus the SIP68 metadata,
Sure.
plus the registry metadata? Like there are a lot of like extra, data we can add to those endpoints that really makes the developer experience, much better.
I love that. And so for those sort of watching and sort of thinking about this, like even if you're not a developer, what's really interesting about that, right, is that like, to your point, it's common that you might have like an API call where you say, okay, give me all of the NFTs like at this address, and then once you get them and you have them in hand, then you say, okay, fine, then for this NFT, now give me the metadata for it, right? And you're like, okay, now for this NFT, now that I have the metadata, maybe then go and fetch me like this additional information about whatever. And so it sounds like what you guys are doing then. And so again, the cost with that is now you're making potentially 2 or 3 round trip calls to fully construct what you actually wanted. And so it sounds like what you guys are doing then is like working with developers and trying to figure out, okay, what is the information you're trying to aggregate to at the very end, and see if we can't like provide a common API endpoint that would just give you like, okay, you do a call and you get back all the NFTs with their metadata that is most usually relevant, like that kind of thing. Is that like sort of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, exactly. And then the end result is just better user experience, right? It feels like snappier applications, less post-processing logic.
Yep.
And that's what we call these are like highly optimized. And yes, they are opinionated, but we know that many applications need the same type of data in a certain format. So might as well optimize for that.
Totally, and that totally makes sense, because it's when you're doing like with any kind of application that someone's interacting with on the web, always the longest time sink is when you have to go over the wire and back. And so if you're making that call of 2, 3, 4 times, and you guys have an opinionated call that you can make where it's like, okay, you don't have to do it once, then the user's going to find it to be a much snappier experience, because even if they don't know what's going on under the hood, the app only has to do that work one time. So that's great.
Less loading wheels.
Exactly, right. And that's what you're seeing a lot of times when you see sort of like these things like progressively loading, where it's like part of it, then the other piece, is because you're quite literally, like what you're not seeing under the hood is the app making these calls to these different things back and forth, whereas if you can just do it once, it's all right there. That's fantastic.
And that's like when you want to build the transactions, but we also are we have a transaction manager when you submit transactions, and so we then monitor your transaction in the mempool and on-chain, so that we can give you like real-time notification.
Where it is in the state.
And when is it on-chain, right? And really reducing that buffer. And so we're actually...
If it's been rolled back, and if it's been rejected or failed.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that mempool a little bit, because like when you're talking about like common bottlenecks that people run into, right? So for the kind of things you're saying, like you mentioned, by far the biggest player in the space is BlockFrost right now. Which, by the way, can we just say how funny it is that it's kind of like they're like, oh, we want to come in and disrupt and whatever else, and like 3 years ago, none of us were here at all. So it's like it's such a short amount of time that we're kind of just like, all right, let's do something different for something that, you know,
it's still new.
Yeah. So anyways, I just find that funny how fast everything moves. Like we always joke at Book that like, you know, like in blockchain time, like a year and a half is just like feels like a decade, right? So and anyway, so with that, like the biggest name in the space right now is BlockFrost, and one of the biggest challenges that I see people run into is specifically around transaction submission under load, right? And how that works with the mempool and stuff like that. And sometimes it's just like you just get like a saturated mempool and things get backed up. What are some of the optimizations you guys have been able to do in terms of like speeding that process up?
Yeah, I think the biggest feature is our turbo transactions, where essentially we built light nodes in-house that the sole purpose of it is to help propagate transactions through the network. So that's like one way in which when there actually is high network load, globally, right, like in Cardano, our transaction propagator is going to help relative to other transaction submission relays, it's going to help propagate your transaction much faster to the chain.
How does that, without getting too technical, how does that work in terms of facilitating that transaction propagation? Like, and so like how like, because I've been wondering that for a while, how do you make that the transactions can be on-chain faster?
To put it very simply, we're just connecting with a lot of nodes in the network, and a lot of relays, and each one of those we have parallel connection with each of those, and they each have like their queue of transactions that they're trying to propagate. So we're basically trying to propagate that transaction simultaneously to as many nodes that we're connected with at the same time.
Right, that makes sense.
And then internally, like how we built that, obviously, like that is, we worked really hard on effectively making like a light node that its sole purpose is to propagate transactions.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, instead of having to worry about all the other heavier things that come with the node, you're like, your only responsibility is tell as many other people in the network as possible that this is waiting in the queue.
And I mean, that's like one of many, that's like the one thing that we have done, but there's so many things on the horizon around like batch submitting transactions. Like customers have asked us around, like, could we give you like 20 or 50 or 100 signed transactions, and then you are responsible for like batching those and submitting those, let's say. So we're toying with those kinds of ideas right now, and there's always room for improvement in terms of like getting your transaction on chain. I think that is an endless problem that we just have to carve at. And people using it, give us a lot of feedback on how to do that.
So that's cool. So you got two big parts there. The first one is getting it out to as many nodes as possible, because again, the idea, right, when you have any stake pool, like our ASPEN stake pool or any other ones, right, you look at the mempool for your pool, you see sort of what transactions are coming in, you bundle them all together, and you send them out to the network, but there's no way to know ahead of time which is the next pool that's going to be putting together a block. So with what you're doing, if you propagate it out to as many different ones as possible, then it's the highest likelihood that whichever one is next that is putting together a block of waiting transactions, then that gets put in. So that's really cool, because now you've got that breadth in terms of letting people know. You, with getting really good at stacking as many things as possible into a block, right, with batching transactions and stuff, you have that part. The other piece that I think is a big throughput thing that you hear about a lot, that like Adam Dean got really good at this, and he like taught RJ this at Book.io, and it's how we do all of our airdrops and things like that, is with transaction chaining. And so that's a thing that like, when people are first getting into it, it's a very tricky thing to learn how to do. So have you guys been able to do anything kind of like transaction chaining as a service or anything like that? Because that could be kind of an interesting thing where I'm like, hey, I have all these transactions and I want them all in a batch. You currently offer that. But if I'm kind of like, okay, well, I want to sequence all of these transactions together and not wait for consecutive blocks, but have them all chained and submitted in that way.
So actually, earlier what I was talking about is like the user that requested this is like they wanted to give us, they already chained the transactions, and then they submit those transactions to us, and then we just submit them essentially. Okay. So we haven't thought about like us doing the actual chaining ourselves.
Right.
But we receive chain transactions, and then we just try to submit all of them as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's a really good idea to like, is there a way for us as providers to chain those transactions?
Well, yeah, because if it's one of those things where like, the way I think of it is like, I would imagine a very common use case, right, is like I'm a project and I have either these tokens or these NFTs or whatever, and I want to send them to these 100 different addresses, and I want it to all come from this initial source address, right? And then if you guys could offer like a chaining as a service where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna, from the token sitting at this initial address, let's work our way through these 100 different destinations, and you guys handle all the chaining of all of them, and then you package them all into a block and send it out. Then also now you really start getting that throughput, and then it lowers the overhead of what that development team needs to do, especially if they don't have like a very technical in-house team, right? If what they're is just like an NFT project, and and they don't have somebody who's really good at the UTXOs. Anyway, just thinking out loud about
great. Totally.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
And then, I mean, just to wrap that up, I mean, the transaction turbo transaction is also integrated with the transaction monitor. So even if you use that turbo transaction service, you could still get notifications on the transaction state changes for all of them. So it all kind of ties together.
That's fantastic.
And even if you submit transactions at scale with our turbo transactions, you can still monitor all of them and get notifications on all of them.
Right. So how long have you guys been around as a company?
So we started off as like a stake pool operator back in like
It was June 2021. We had our just like fun pool, Maestro pool.
Okay.
Like a lot of infra provider, you start off as a stake pool operator. You're like, let me run the node and see what happens. And then
that's how Endmaker started. Patrick was like, "Oh, this will be fun," and I'll help you make NFTs, and it turned into a whole company. So
And then you jump into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
2 years later, you realize like, what have my life gone?
Yeah, exactly.
We quit our jobs. We had great job in Silicon Valley, and we just went full head on. And it's to be honest, it's been really tough 2 years. Like most projects.
Yep.
It's a lot of hard work, a lot of passion, a lot of dedication. And we're just glad to feel like we're really getting that momentum now, that recognition, and we really have deep understanding and expertise about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of optimization and these kind of tools that we need as an ecosystem, right? You look at EVM and they've matured. The dev experience on EVM is very mature, and because they spend those years really building those abstractions, and we still need to get to that maturity on Cardano, and that's really what we're trying to bring to the space.
And so with that, and we're kind of starting to wrap us up here. So yesterday you guys won Battle of the Builders, so congratulations. So what does that mean for you guys in terms of, I guess very tangibly, like what does that provide in terms of next steps for Maestro with winning that award?
Yeah, so I think this year we're in a very different place than last year. This year we have all our products are basically live. We've been building and building for over a year. Our products are live. Our products are ready. We have DEXs, lending protocols, crypto wallets powered by Maestro today on mainnet. So for us, our next stage is growth, right? Is getting our name out there and working with current projects and upcoming projects and help them get the application live. So with this competition, I think hopefully one of the results is to get noticed by other people building and say like, I can use Maestro, maybe cut my development time in half, cut my costs in half, and get to mainnet faster.
Awesome, cool. So we're here at the Cardano Summit 2023. This has been a really great chat. So let's plan on doing this again at the summit again next year. And so as we look forward to next year, then what are you most looking forward to or most excited to for the next year for Maestro? Or where would you like when we sit down next year? What are you hoping that we can be talking about next year in terms of where
Well, first of all, I want us to all be in suits and on a stage.
Yeah.
All three of us. So
sure.
I hope all of us grow together. But I mean, just continue to grow in adoption, not just Maestro, but Cardano as a whole.
Yeah.
I want our whole ecosystem to just be in a much better place. I want, important applications in the real world to incorporate Cardano. And that will reflect positively on all of our projects. So just however that manifests itself, I think we're very much on track to getting there, and Maestro hopefully will play a key role in making that happen.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, like on the channel, we always say, let's keep growing together. So I like that you kind of phrase it in that way.
I actually didn't even know
that. Exactly. Fantastic. So, cool. So with that, any last thoughts for the folks that are watching that may want to learn more about Maestro or anything like that? Like any thoughts for people following along?
Everything started on our website, so go maestro.org. And if you're more of a technical person, go to our documentation. We spend a lot of time creating extensive documentation and tutorials and user guides. So check out the platform. I'm sure you'll find something useful for yourself.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for coming out. Really appreciate the time. So good learning more about the project. If you have any questions about Maestro, let us know in the comments down below. And if nothing else, we'll see you next week. Thanks.